Thank you so much, Faria, and thanks everyone for joining here today. Let me just share my slides to make sure that you can see what I am talking about. Okay. And it's so nice to see all of you here this afternoon. Please let me know, where are you coming from? I am in Toronto, Canada, in the same place as the Rotman Business School. But if you are from Toronto, let me know. If you're not, please let me know as well. And also, please let me know in the chat box, where are you in your admissions journey? If we can please make sure that everybody can participate in the chat. So participants can chat. Yeah, I believe that everybody can chat. Awesome. So if you have any personal questions about let's say your study plan or what do I do if, then please put them in the Q&A box. Otherwise, I love to keep these interactive, so please use the chat box as much as you possibly can. Okay, and let's just make sure that I can see your chat. Can everybody tell me if you can hear me well? Just please let me know in the chat box. Perfect. Okay. That's Srishti from Vancouver. Okay, great. Well, in this case, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to throw you into a deep end. Some of you are just starting. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Some of you have been doing this for a while. So I want to show you what the GMAT is like. I wanted to actually show you a couple of questions, and then we'll talk about how the GMAT is changing. We'll talk about how do you prepare for the GMAT, what are the different resources, and I'll share with you some of the other seminars that you can attend as well. And you'll walk away today with, if not strategies for every question type, that might be impossible in the span of 50 minutes, but certainly you'll have a sample of what's coming your way on the GMAT, and at least you have a plan going forward. We will be talking about the current version of the test versus the GMAT Focus. So I do see some questions here about the GMAT Focus edition, certainly something that we will address as well. So here's the real question from the past exam. Let me show you a question. The question says the ratio of pigs to chickens on a certain farm is 13 to 28. When 15 pigs were added to the farm, the ratio of pigs to chickens became 4 to 7. What was the original total number of pigs and chickens on the farm? What do you think? What could we do here? Any thoughts, any strategies? Let me know in the chat box. And by the way, just so that we're very clear, the GMAT is a multiple choice exam. So I'm not going to necessarily expect you to try to solve this problem. I'm sure you know how to solve this problem given enough time, because we've all learned this in school, right? Even though we probably haven't owned farms, most of us, we don't need to know anything about farming because this is a question that deals with ratios, and it's a multiple choice exam. So how do most people approach this problem? I know for some of you, it may have been a long time ago. By the way, just so that we're very clear, the math on the GMAT, the 90% of math on the GMAT is from elementary school. Not even high school, 90%. There's 0 from university. And there's a very, very small number of topics from high school. So that means that A, it's pretty basic, and most of us have done that. But B, unfortunately, for most of us, it's been a very long time ago. Even if you are still in your mid-20s, then the stuff that is tested on the GMAT is probably at least 10 years, maybe 15 years ago, or was 10 to 15 years ago. So how can we approach this problem? Well, here's how we've done that in high school or in the middle school. Let's call it the school way, or I like to call it the work hard way. Here's what we're given. We're given the ratio. The ratio is given in the most reduced form. So when we're told the ratio is 13 to 28, it doesn't actually mean that we have 13 pigs and 28 chickens. For all we know, we can have 13,000 pigs and 28,000 chickens. So there's some sort of what's called a multiplier. Essentially, we are told that we have 13 times n pigs and 20 n times n chickens. We're then told that we're adding 15 pigs, and of course, the new number of pigs is going to be 13n plus 15. We are also given a new ratio. And if we were to put these numbers in a ratio, we are going to get the new ratio 4 to 7. It's a simple linear equation. All we have to do is solve for n and then do some simple math. So for most of us, we can do this within maybe a couple of minutes. Once we find that n is equal to 5, we can calculate the number of pigs, which will be 65, 13 times 5, the number of chickens, which is 28 times 5, which is 140. Hopefully, we haven't made any mistakes in our math because the numbers are pretty close. So a small mistake can actually cost us the right answer. And hopefully, if everything's okay, we're going to get the answer. And the answer is actually B, 205. So that's how we've done things in high school. Here's a problem with this approach. The problem is, problem number one, it takes some time. Problem number two, there's way too much math here. And every time I'm doing some sort of a mathematical operation, I'm giving myself an opportunity to make a mistake. So why don't we look at a different way of doing this question? Let's go with the work smart way. We also like to call it the mastery way. You're going to probably use it that way when you've really mastered the GMAT. That's why, by the way, here at Admit Master, we call our course the GMAT Mastery, because the idea is to teach you these more advanced strategies. So here is what we could do. We are told that the ratio is 13 to 28. That means for every 13 pigs, we have 28 chickens. If we were to add 13 more pigs, we're going to have to add 28 more chickens. Essentially, what does this mean? Well, this means that we don't really know the number of animals, but we do know that the number of pigs, the number of chickens must be divisible by 28. That also means that the total number of animals, the original total number of pigs and chickens combined on this farm, must be a multiple of 13 plus 28, which is 41. I mean, think about this. That's how the ratios work, right? If we, as a farmers, go and buy 13 more pigs, we're going to have to buy 28 more chickens for the ratio to work. And then the number will still be a multiple of 41. Oh, the question was asking us, what was the original total number of pigs and chickens in the farm? Let me ask you this question. If we know the number has to be a multiple of 41, how many of the answer choices are multiples of 41? Well, only one, of course. And it's not very hard to figure out which one, because 200 times 41 or 5 times 41 is actually 205. So it's quick to do the calculations. There's actually only pretty much 1 or 2 calculations that we can do here, and they're very simple, and we can do this literally in 30 seconds. So many people ask, well, I know how to do problems in the GMAT. I just need to do them faster. If we were to try to do what we usually do in the previous slide, but we try to do it faster, what would happen? We'll just make a careless mistake. So the key to doing these problems is to have different strategies that save us time and hopefully reduce calculations so that we can both get the question right and get it right fast. And that's what's going to help us get to a high score on the GMAT. Well, in this case, actually, the information that we had 15 pigs added proved to be not that important. I mean, it was there because most people are going to do it the way that we've showed before. But we were able to deal with this problem even without that piece of information. Interesting. So this was a quantitative reasoning problem. Why don't we take a look at a verbal reasoning problem, critical reasoning? Here's the question that is currently, or the types of questions that are currently tested on the GMAT and will continue to be tested on GMAT Focus. We'll talk a bit about the structure of the GMAT versus GMAT Focus in just a few minutes. But I'd like to give you about 30 seconds or so to try to figure out what actually is going on here. Just so please give it a read. I'll be quiet for about 30 seconds, and then we'll deal with this problem. All right, let me ask you this, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to ask you to try to describe what the answer is, but I do want to ask you, how many times have you read this passage in the 30 seconds that I've given you? Please let me know in the chat box. Were you able to read it once, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times? Let me know. Okay, some people were able to read just half of it. So let me ask you this question then. Of the time that I've given you, how much of the passage did you really understand? And you could give me what percentage, saying 0 means I don't understand anything from this passage. 100 means I understand everything and I'm ready to answer the question. Let me know in the chat box. Don't be shy. I like to keep these classes interactive. By the way, if you were in our live class, you would either be in a physical classroom with me, or if you're online, you'll all be on web cameras, because I want to see you and look you in the eyes and see what you're thinking. So let me know in the chat box, how much of this passage do you really understand? On a scale of 0% to 100%. Okay, some people are saying 50%, 75%. Okay, so let me show you the answer choices. And I'm going to ask you to type in the chat box what you think is the correct answer to this question. And the question, remember, was the statement above in boldface, please, which of the following roles in the ethicist's argument? So here are 5 answer choices. Please look through them. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds and let me know in the chat box what you think is the correct answer. I am seeing all of your chats, so if you don't see chats of other people, don't worry. This is just a setting here in the meeting. But I am seeing all of your chats and what you're responding. Okay, I see a few answers coming in here. Thank you. I'm not going to tell you what they are yet, because I want to give you another 15, 20 seconds to try to pick an answer. Don't worry about getting this question wrong. It's not about getting this right. It's about doing it. The GMAT is an exam to which you will prepare by doing. It's learning by doing. So lots of practice. Okay. Yeah, I see a few people for, all right. So I see some people for A, a few people for B, a few people for D, a lot of people for E. Okay, some people for C. So looks like we have votes for every single answer choice. Thanks so much for sharing this. How hard do you think is this question? Let me know in the chat box. Do you think it's hard, easy, medium? And in the meantime, what I would like to do is go back to the passage. And the passage here was an argument by an ethicist. Right, so thanks so much. Most of you are thinking it's a medium difficulty passage. So it's an argument by an ethicist. I don't know if you've ever met somebody whose profession is ethicist, but it's actually somebody who studies ethics. So most likely some sort of maybe a professor at the university who writes books about ethics and teaches classes, right? So really exciting stuff, right? Let me ask you this question. You're trying to get into a business school, a prestigious top-tier business school such as Rotman. How much do you need to know about ethics? What do you think? Well, here's my opinion on this. I think you have to be ethical if you're trying to become a leader or trying to get into a top business school, but you don't have to be an expert in ethics. Certainly not on the level at which this ethicist is an expert in ethics. So when we're reading this, what most people do is they try to understand what does it actually mean to praise people for doing what's right or to consider them virtuous if they resist the desire to do what's wrong. People focus on that a lot. But the question actually wasn't about ethics. Just like we said, you don't have to be an expert in ethics. The question was, the statement in bold plays which of the following roles? So it wasn't what the author is saying, it was why something was said. And if I want to understand the why something was said as opposed to what was said, I need to focus not on the content keywords, but on the structure keywords of the keywords that help us connect the thoughts inside the argument. And again, because the GMAT can really give you passages about anything, and you're not really supposed to be an expert in anything. I mean, they could have given us a passage on organic chemistry. And honestly, we don't need to know anything about this because all we need to focus on is answering the question. The question was, what role does this statement play? There was a statement that was bolded in the argument. For that, we need to understand how does it fit into the overall structure. The author begins by saying, somebody is wrong and I am right. Well, you can't just go around telling people they're wrong without backing that up, right? You need some sort of evidence or support or what's called a premise. Some sort of a support to my claim. I'm making a claim as an ethicist that somebody is wrong and I'm right. So I better support that claim. And that's exactly what I'm doing in the bolded part. Now, there are different ways to support the claim. I can give an example or a counter example. I can bring in another expert, or I can provide some facts or statistics. And here's what the author is doing here. The author is basically saying, yeah, these people are wrong. I'm right. Even though this part is true, these people are still wrong. So the part in bold is supporting the author's claim. It was before it. The claim was these people are wrong, I'm right. Or the main opinion or the main point of the argument. And with this particular support, the author does agree with, right? The author says, although this is true, blank. And the question was about that blank, that the author thinks is true, even though people probably misinterpreted it, something like that. So now that we've done this analysis, notice that we haven't talked about ethics at all. Let's take a look at our answer choices. How about we start with C? It's usually the most popular answer here in this question, and some people think that C stands for correct, so they just pick C by default. Yeah, I know. So C says it is a faulty claim. What is a faulty claim? I mean, remember the question was about that statement in bold. They also said, although this is true, so how could we say in the answer choice that it's a faulty claim if it's, well, first of all, it's not a claim. And secondly, it's certainly not faulty because they also said it's true. So we can eliminate C right off the bat. We don't even have to continue reading it. It's not faulty. Done. D, it is according to the argument, a commonly held opinion, that is nevertheless false. Wait a second. Remember, they also said for although this is true, so no, it is not false. E, it reports an observation that the argument claims is false. Okay, I guess I can stop reading at this point. So now I'm down to two answer choices. And once I have two answer choices left, how many of them do I really have to analyze? I mean, it's a multiple choice exam. I only have two answer choices left, so I don't even have to read both of them. I'm just going to read one of them, whichever I think takes less time. And if it's right, that's good. If it's wrong, then it has to be the one that's remaining. So I'm just going to be lazy and I'm going to read a shorter one. A. It says, it is a claim for which the argument attempts to provide justification. Really? It actually wasn't a claim, right? Somebody is saying, no, it's not a claim because the claim was before it. The claim is the author's main point, the main opinion. It was that these people are wrong, that I'm right. So no, it's not A. And I guess by the process of elimination, it just has to be B. Yeah. And on the real test, you're not even going to read B, honestly. I mean, we've eliminated everything else. So that brings us to a very important question. And I'm sure that many of you had this question when you came to the seminar today. And that is, what would it take for me to get a 700 plus score? You know, the score that can certainly help you get into a business school, a prestigious business school such as Rotman, and a score that potentially might help you land some entrance scholarship and might potentially even help you with recruitment, because there are many top consulting firms and investment banks and other companies from different industries that will actually ask you, what was your GMAT score? Because that's how they can evaluate your essentially reasoning skills. So what would it take to get a 700 plus score? Well, interestingly enough, the answers to this question is right on MBA.com or in the official GMAT guide. It is resources that are prepared by the people who make the test, the GMAT, Graduate Management Admission Council. Here's what this organization says. Please do understand. And by the way, I'm going to show you this quote, and I'm going to supplement this quote with the words that I heard from the GMAT. Because we belong to a small group of test prep organizations that have been doing this for a long time, are well respected. So we go to meet the GMAT. We have very good relationships with them. We do different events together, and then we have this little get together where we get there for a day. We go to the GMAT headquarters. You know, we eat a nice dinner and we talk about the GMAT. You know, interestingly enough, and we meet people who work for the GMAT, people who you know, are responsible for different parts of the organization, including the CEO of the GMAT. And at one of the events, they actually showed us this quote and they said, please, when you talk to your candidates, tell them the GMAT is not a normal test. What do normal tests do? Well, the test, any test, is supposed to measure something, right? Let me give you an example. Let's say you're going and doing a blood test. Well, it's going to measure a certain percentage of certain chemicals in your blood to see whether you're healthy, you need to change your diet or things like that. Another test that you can possibly do is go to the gym and weigh yourself or measure your height. That's also a test. Most of the tests that we have ever done through our educational system, we're measuring our memory. I mean, think about this. Let's say you're doing a test in history or geography. They'll ask you, what's the capital of Paraguay? And if you know that, you'll probably score a point. And if you don't, then you won't. So you just have to have a good memory. The GMAT, however, is a test that's called the psychometric test. It measures not what you know, but it measures how you think. It evaluates in about 2.5 to 3 hours whether you have the right skills to succeed in a business school. Not what kind of subject matters you know, because everything you need to know about business is going to be taught in a business school, but whether you have the right frame of mind, whether you have the right, what the GMAT calls higher order reasoning skills. I mean, they certainly use certain topics. So they expect that you know a bit of math, you know, not too much, primarily from the elementary school. Most of it's from grades 5 to 8. And they also expect that you're able to communicate in English. But that's pretty much it. Everything else is about thinking differently about these problems. And you've seen already a couple of examples. I'm going to show you some more examples today. Why most people struggle with the GMAT is because we have this idea that was given to us by our educational system that knowledge is power. We were told that if we do really well and remember our class and, you know, learn these poems and the names of the capitals of the countries in the world, we're going to grow up and be very successful, right? You know, look where it got us. So because the GMAT is an exam of a skill as opposed to knowledge, I like to use different analogies. And one of the analogies I like to use is the GMAT being a sport. Imagine you're trying to excel at a certain sport. This is just a mental sport, kind of like almost playing chess, right? Or imagine you're doing maybe a physical sport, which most of us do. Let's say you want to swim, learn how to swim. You don't just read a book on swimming. You got to start swimming, and hopefully you're going to get some coaching and maybe somebody to tell you what you're doing wrong and maybe show you some good strategies. So I'm really grateful, actually, that you've decided to come here. We have a lot of people here today, and let me be your coach for about 45 minutes or so. And we certainly continue working afterwards as well. We have all kinds of different events that I'll share with you. And somebody's asking, how do you manage your nerves? Well, I imagine, how do you manage your nerves on the real exam? So I will share this with you today. Don't worry. Let me show you something else that will really help you understand a little bit more about the test. When I ask people, and I've been doing this personally for now almost 15 years, I've asked people, tell me about the GMAT. What do you know? And they say, well, I know there's math and I know there's English. I don't really know much else. So, I know it's an adaptive test or it's in a computer. And then when I show them the structure of the test, they say, well, actually, you know what? It's not a math test. It's also not an English test. It's a test that evaluates these skills. And that's exactly what even the structure of the test shows us. It evaluates our reasoning skills. It evaluates your analytical skills. That's really what it's all about. Now, some questions will have numbers in them. Some questions won't. Some questions have lots of data, which are the questions you're going to have in the integrated reasoning section. So in the current version of the test, this test, the current version of the GMAT, has been around now for 11 years, since 2012. And on that version of the test, you have 4 different sections: an essay, which a lot of people are scared about, but you absolutely shouldn't. It's like the easiest section you ever do. And then we have 3 sections: integrated reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and verbal reasoning. Only 2 of these sections, quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning, actually contribute towards your total score on a scale of 200 to 800. The integrated reasoning score section does not contribute towards the total score. And on the quantitative reasoning, there are actually 2 question types: problem solving and data sufficiency. We're going to do one data sufficiency question today as well. And if you want to know more, we are actually offering 2-hour free refresher classes. Our next math refresher class is on September 27th. Next verbal refresher class, where we're going to tackle all 3 of these question types, is going to be on October 11th. So please make sure that you go to admitmaster.com and book your free seat to these 2-hour virtual classes. These 2 sections on the current version of the test are also computer adaptive. What does this mean? Well, imagine this. In approximately 3 hours, the GMAT is going to evaluate whether you're fit for the business school. And the GMAT score is usually worth more than your GPA that took you 4 years to get. So how is that possible? That within such a short period of time, the GMAT is able to fairly assess different candidates. Well, they do this by adapting what's called the computer adaptive algorithm, or using that computer adaptive algorithm. Essentially, it changes the difficulty of the questions as you go along. If you're answering many questions right, it's not going to keep giving you easy questions, waste your time. It's just going to keep giving you harder questions to see which ones you can handle. Just for the record, you're not getting more time for harder questions. So you could go into the test and it will be a really hard test just because you're going to do a lot of hard questions. Some other people might get a lot of easy questions, right? So for them, it's going to be an easier test, but they'll end up with a much lower score. So if you want to get a high score, which I imagine most of you do have to learn how to deal with harder questions, and that would require a very different approach. And I've already shown you a couple of different strategies today. And again, I'll show you how you can learn them. I'll give you the step-by-step process. Now, many of you are asking, how is the GMAT changing? Well, that's a really good question. You've probably heard that there's a new GMAT Focus Edition that is available starting from November 7th. You can actually go online and book your seat now from November 7th for the new exam. The new exam is going to be shorter. Instead of 3 hours and 7 minutes without the break, it's going to be 2 hours and 15 minutes, because instead of 4 sections, it's going to consist of only 3. the questions are also rearranged within these sections. For example, data insights, which is a new section, is actually the old integrated reasoning section with the data sufficiency questions moved from quantitative reasoning into data insights. Each section is now exactly 45 minutes. There's a different number of questions. You have slightly more time for quant, slightly less time for verbal, and even a little bit more time for data insights. But if you've done integrated reasoning, you know that you currently have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So you're going to have a slightly less time. There's going to be one 10-minute break as opposed to two. And there's not going to be an AWA, which is an essay. Sentence correction is going to be removed. The geometry is going to be removed. And many people, therefore, I was just talking to a gentleman a couple of days ago, and he said, I'd like to do the GMAT Focus Edition because I hate writing essays, and therefore, I want to do the new version. And my response is usually this: if you come to our class, in 45 minutes, we're going to show you how to get a score of 6, which is a maximum score on the essay. And most of our students, over 50%, get a score of 6. And most other will get a score of 5. It's been a really long time since any of our students, and again, I've been doing this for 15 years, got a score below 5. So choosing the GMAT Focus over the current version of the GMAT should be for other reasons, but definitely not for the reason of AWA. So how would you choose? Well, let me show you a couple of interesting insights. First of all, the scoring on the GMAT Focus is going to change. The current score of 700 is going to be only approximately 640 on the new test. And if you want to get above 700 on a new test, it's kind of like getting 760 on the old test. Very hard to do. So in the new version of the test, it's going to be practically impossible to get scores above 700. So a few things are changing. And even though it seems like it's a shorter exam, let me give you a few insights. First of all, regarding timing, you can go ahead and purchase the official prep right now. You can either prepare for the GMAT Focus or the old GMAT exam as of right now. By the way, if you prepare for the older GMAT exam, you could absolutely still take the GMAT Focus because the questions are the same, just certain things are not included in the GMAT Focus. However, if you start preparing for the GMAT Focus, it's going to be harder for you to then go back to the current version of the test just because certain types of questions are not there anymore on the GMAT Focus, for example, geometry and sentence correction. You can actually start taking the test from November 7th, and the old exam is still available until sometime in Q1. As of right now, you can still book this exam into at least February. So if you're thinking of taking the current version of the test, maybe you've already been studying, you absolutely still can do that. So the big question is the GMAT changing because it's getting easier? And the quick answer is this. Instead of giving you a yes or no answer, I'm just going to give you a couple of questions to ponder. First of all, the test makers are generally not known for making tests easier. Here's why. Over time, people learn how to beat the test. They learn different strategies. And therefore, as time goes by, generally tests are becoming harder. I mean, think about this. In terms of the scoring for the test, now close to around 13% of people get scores above 700. Going forward, it's just going to be 1%. The second thing is whether you're comfortable with time management, whether you're a very logical thinker, or whether you learned how to do things in a very strategic, mechanical approach. Because some questions, for example, sentence correction and geometry questions, even though for some people they seem harder, they actually could be dealt with a lot quicker because there's a very specific strategy. You can go step by step and you can deal with almost every sentence correction question in maybe a minute, 15 seconds to a minute. I know it might sound hard right now, but once you actually learn how to do this, it's not that hard. So some of these questions are going to be removed. So actually, actually on the new version of the test, the timing is going to be a little more intensive. Maybe that's why it's a shorter exam, right? It's going to be shorter, but it's going to be more intensive. And on the balance, you're going to have a little bit less time per question, because some of the questions that take less time are going to be removed, and the questions that take a little bit more time are going to stay there. So that's why, if you're still trying to decide whether to take the old version of the GMAT or the new version of the GMAT, and you are on the fence, I would suggest just go and take 2 practice tests, the current version and the new version, and see how you do. They're score comparison tables, just like I show you. So compare your scores and see where you stand. And if you don't know what to decide, my advice is just start preparing for the older version of the test. And if you feel that you're not meeting the timelines, you can always switch to the new version. All right, so that brings us to an important question. And that is, how do I actually prepare for this test? So let's talk about the resources for this test. What kinds of resources could I use, right? And then I'll show you some more strategies as well within the time that we have approximately 20 minutes left. So here's how you can structure your studies. Again, because this is a test of a skill as opposed to the test of a knowledge, simply reading a book and trying to memorize what's in the book is actually not going to work. We need a different approach. Okay? So here's what the approach is going to be. By the way, somebody is asking whether the integrated reasoning is not part of the GMAT. Yes, you're absolutely right. On the current version of the GMAT, integrated reasoning is not a part of the total score. On the new version of the test, it will be. And also on the new version of the test, the new data insight section, which is essentially the old integrated reasoning plus data sufficiency, a grand total of 20 questions, of which about 12 are integrated reasoning, about 8 are data sufficiency, are actually going to become adaptive. So that means instead of seeing a bunch of easy and some medium and a few hard questions, you're going to potentially see a lot of hard questions. So that's another reason why the new version of the test is going to be a little bit more intensive. It's going to feel like a really fast sprint. You're doing this for only 2 hours, but it's going to be probably as tiring as the current version of the test. So how can you structure your studies? Having a proper plan is really important. If I want to learn how to, let's say, give you a personal example, I learned how to sail a boat. I always wanted to learn how to sail a boat, but to me, it was always difficult. Like I saw some people sailing a boat. I have no idea how they're doing this. So I wanted to learn. And I had a certain strategy, a certain process of how I was going to do this, right? And I'll actually show you the process that you can use whenever you learn any new sport or you're preparing for any exam similar to the GMAT. So here was the first step for me. When I was preparing for the GMAT, the very first step was to learn a little bit about the test. And at that time, when I was doing my test, there were no webinars available. Zoom wasn't around. Even Facebook wasn't around, right? It was like about 20 years ago, actually, to be honest. What was available, though, is MBA.com with some practice tests. So I went on MBA.com and took a practice test. Now there's so many practice tests available. You can even go on our website, admitmaster.com. There's also a really nice website, trygmat.com, where you can go and take a completely free practice test. You're going to get a full report of your strengths and weaknesses. So that's what I did. I took a practice test and I scored 650. And I said, okay, that's a good start. But what would help me get a higher score, right? So I made sure that I went back, I analyzed what I was doing there. And, to me personally, the gap was English terminology. I learned all of my math in a different language. So I didn't know what's an isosceles triangle. I had no idea when I was doing my first mock exam. So I had to review it. Once I've done that, I took the next practice test. I worked on my weaknesses. Right? I was closing these gaps, and my next practice test, well, I scored higher. It was actually 700 on my second practice test. And at that time, I thought, okay, good time for me to book the real test. And again, of course, I'm showing this to you not just to tell you what I've done, but hopefully so that you can start structuring your study plan as well. You might have different scores, but taking the diagnostic test first, working on your gaps, reaching the score that you want on the practice test, and then booking your real test is probably what most of you should do. Are you allowed a formula sheet in the test? No, the only thing you can bring to the test is the clothes on your back. You're not allowed to bring a watch, a pen, a calculator, a phone, a book, nothing, right? They're gonna give you a marker with a notepad to write, but no, you can't bring absolutely anything else. So yeah, online exam is even stricter. Yeah, if you're thinking about taking the online exam versus an in-person exam, my suggestion is take the in-person exam because the online exam is so strict. One of our students recently was taking an exam, and about 3 hours into the exam, there were some computer difficulties, and the proctor was trying to help. And 4 hours later, the person was finally able to finish the exam. Honestly, don't do that unless you cannot show up physically to the test center. That's just my personal advice. And the physical test is actually a little bit cheaper than the online test as well. So the whole process from start to finish took me about 2 weeks. From the time I took the first mock exam to the time I got 750 on my real test. This is my official score report, just to show you that everything is legit. It's really my name and it's really my score, and I'm very proud of it. And I'm showing this not to impress you. It honestly impresses me. I don't get to look at my score that often once I've submitted to my MBA program application. But it's something you can, boast about. I got multiple interviews to top consulting firms because of my score. But in case you're wondering, Sergey, 752 weeks, he's probably a genius. How can I do this? I'm glad you're thinking that, but let me tell you something. I'm definitely not a genius. I'm not any smarter than other people. The reason why I was able to do it so quickly and so well is because I actually took many years to learn these strategies. And since I became a GMAT instructor about 14 and a half years ago, I've been practicing teaching the GMAT. And if you think you're having fun in this class, then that's great. I love it. I love what I'm doing. And many people tell me, many of our students say, oh, this is the best class I've ever taken. You have such great instructors. I'm not the only one here at Admit Master. It's because we love what we do, right? And we share these strategies with you. So for me, what helped is I had amazing teachers in my school. This was my teacher from grade 4 to grade 11, which is in our educational system. It was 11 years. And he was my math teacher. Just honestly, it was the best teacher I've ever had, right? So most of the things I learned, not just about math, but also about how to teach, was from him. And to me, he just recently passed away at the age of 95, just an amazing gentleman. I owe a lot to him, right? That's perhaps why I became an instructor. And, I remember I had a student a few years ago. She was out of school for a while. She was in her mid-30s, and she hated math, like totally hated. And she ended up doing pretty well. She went to one of the executive MBA programs. And I was just speaking with her recently, and she said, well, Sergey, you wouldn't believe it. I'm volunteering. I'm teaching kids how to prepare for math Olympiads. And I'm like, wait a second, you hated math. She said, you know what? Your class actually inspired me. And now I love math. We had another student who was a musician. He ended up not only getting into his dream business school, he ended up participating in a worldwide cryptocurrency competition, doing all the math behind the case, and their team won the second place worldwide. Their team was printed on the cover of the Economist magazine. So lots of things that you can learn from this. So like I mentioned, I love my job. This is me at the GMAT headquarters just a few weeks ago. And I'm very proud of our students as well. Somebody's asking, can you talk about the GMAT versus GRE? I will talk about this in a moment as well. So here's our student. She came to us at the start of the pandemic with a score of 380. And she said, look, I need a 700 plus. And everybody was kind of laughing. And she's like, no, I'm really serious. Tell me what I need to do. And he said, okay, well, Daria, you need to do this. And here's the plan. And she came to our class. She worked very hard for 6 weeks, then continued doing mock exams for 7 more weeks, ended up with a score of 700. And she went to school a year earlier than she anticipated. She did a Master of Finance, which is a school that's very academically heavy. So unless you get a very high score, you probably don't have a chance to get in. And what I like is she didn't really say at the end of the course, in her comments that she wrote on Google for us, Google review. She didn't say, oh, I learned a bunch of really cool formulas. She just said, I learned how to think differently. I learned how to think like a CEO when approaching the questions. And I really learned how to manage my time and stress. So somebody was asking, how do you manage stress? How do you manage my time? Ultimately, how do I navigate the GMAT prep? And again, I love analogies. So I'm going to give you an analogy, another analogy, and then I'm going to tell you exactly how you can do this, how you can structure it so that there's a benefit of you staying almost till the end. So here's how we can navigate something new. Imagine this. You're trying to learn something you've never done before. Let's say I want to learn how to sail a boat. I just need to start doing some research, right? What would help me? Where would I go? Lots of resources available right now. So again, the analogy I'm going to be using is, let's say, analogy of navigating a corn maze. It's been summer, so if you have kids or nieces and nephews, let's say you go to this farm and there's a corn maze, and you walk in and you don't know where to go, right? And the idea is to have fun and eventually find the exit. But you don't know where to go, so we call this a trial and error approach, right? You just try things out until something works. Trial and error approach is amazing if you have lots of time and if you're trying to do something that has never been done before, like Thomas Edison, right? He dedicated his life to inventing a light bulb. After 10,000 tries, eventually it worked because nobody done it before and he had lots of time. When it comes to studying for the GMAT, that's not the right approach because A, you usually don't have that much time because there are lots of other things that you can dedicate your life to or your time to. And number two, it's a standardized test. So it's been done by many people, millions of people, many times before. So then what do we do? How do we structure our studies? Well, one of the things we can do is go and purchase the official GMAT guide. It's the book that's made by the people who make the test. And it was really funny. We were at one of the GMAT conferences just a couple of weeks ago, and we had a table. So we're partners with the GMAT, just like I said. So we go to their events and usually do some seminars and workshops and things like that. And there was a GMAT table and our table. And somebody came to the GMAT and said, "Oh, tell me, how do I manage my time properly on a test?" And they said, if you want to learn how to beat the test, you go talk to these people. We're just making the test. Our goal is to make the test hard. How do you beat the test? We can teach you, right? That's not our objective. That's not our corporate objective. So if you want to learn how to beat the test, you got to learn some strategies. This is just a question bank. So how do you learn the strategies? Well, you need to have a plan, right? And the plan is, how do you learn them? There are many different strategies that you can learn. One of the strategies is just trial and error. You just try to do questions until you get them right. That's option number one. Option number two is you can have a plan. And the plan says, okay, in order for me to learn how to deal with number properties questions, the first thing I need to understand is the basic number theory. Then I need to understand the concept of prime numbers and prime factorization. Afterwards, I need to start doing some simpler problems, perhaps that deal with basic divisibility rules. And I'm going to go into some harder problems that perhaps deal with some variables or maybe deal with the least common multiple, greatest common factor, some of the more advanced concepts. And if I do this step by step, I'm going to be able to deal with every question type because I'll be able to recognize what's being tested and what strategy to use. So having that plan for every type of a question is very important. And if for some of you who understand the concept of time investment, then you also would understand that sometimes it's even better to just let somebody walk you through this whole journey. I remember I was talking to one of our students. She was working for a consulting firm. I think she was working like for a Deloitte. And she was saying, okay, let me share my study plan with you. And then she said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And I said, okay, so that's a good plan. And she gave herself about 9 months to study for the GMAT. Okay, I'm going to study, using these resources and, study for this much time. And I said, okay, how much would the resources cost you? And she's like, okay, about $400-500. I said, okay, let's put the time, let's put the price on your time. How much are you making? And she calculated everything. And I said, wow, How much would your GMAT prep cost you? And she's like, about $60,000. Wow, that's interesting. What if you were to cut this time by a factor of 3? She's like, yeah, that would be a huge investment for me. And she ended up coming to our course and doing exceptionally well on the course and on the GMAT, and actually, again, getting into her dream school a year earlier than she anticipated. So how can you actually have a plan? What is the right plan? Whether you do it yourself, or you work with a private tutor, or you come and take our group program, which is one of the most advanced prep programs that you will find. You can find it either in a live format in Toronto or in a live virtual format, or you can even go through this by yourself. Here are the steps we are going to take you through. It also means that if you go through these materials by yourself, you need to go through them in this order as well. I'm going to use an analogy of learning how to drive a car, let's say a sports car. Let's say you want to learn how to drive a Ferrari on a racetrack. So how do you do that? Or learn how to sail a boat, or learn how to play tennis. Step 1, getting from the basic theory to actually mastering the skill would be to know the rules. Anytime you want to learn a new sport, a new skill, you got to know the rules. With driving, you know the rules of the road. With sailing, I needed to know the points of sail and the geometry of the boat and different parts of the boat. Without that, I can't even get on the boat, right? I'll be in trouble. So the same thing on the GMAT. You need to learn what's a prime number? How do digits work? How do we convert between a fraction and a decimal? All of this is very important. You need to do that before you start digging deeper into the GMAT. Because the GMAT isn't about testing whether you know a prime number. It's about giving you problems that require you to think outside the box. But in order to do this, you need to know the basic rules. If you were to come to our program, our live course, our on-demand course, we are going to give you access to an amazing resource where you're going to be reviewing the basic theory. You'll be doing a series of exercises. So instead of just giving you a book to read about how to convert between a fraction and a decimal, we're just going to give you a bunch of fractions to convert to a decimal, right? And that's what you're going to be doing. And it's pretty fun and it's interactive. So that's what you're going to be doing before you start learning the strategies. That was step 1. That's exactly what you did when you learned how to drive a car, right? A written test came first. Step 2, before you asked your mom and dad for the keys to the car, they probably told you you got to learn how to actually drive a car, right? By the way, this, ladies and gentlemen, this is so simple, but honestly, if this is the only thing you can take away from today's class, and there's 3 steps, so the 3rd step is coming, you'll make your prep so much easier. And then you're going to save potentially so much time. And if we never talk again, and you drop me an email and say, Sergey, I've just saved 6 months because of the strategy that you gave me, I really appreciate it. Or connect with me on LinkedIn. So the second thing that you need to do is actually learn how to drive a car or learn how to deal with questions. Simply knowing how to convert between a fraction and decimal is not going to help you get a good score. You need to learn the strategies. I've shown you a couple of strategies, right? I've shown you the ratio strategy, the process of elimination. I've shown you how do you break down the argument. There are many different strategies you can learn. And my suggestion is before you develop a lot of bad habits, learn the strategies. Learn the good strategies up front, because guess what? Sometimes, you drive on a highway and somebody is a really bad driver. And usually the first thing that comes to my mind is, where in the world did you learn how to drive, right? Because once we learn something, then we just start practicing and it becomes a habit. So make sure you develop these good strategies, good habits up front. As you're doing this, remember this, anytime you're trying something new, you probably are going to fall flat on your face and fail miserably, right? If I give you a bunch of questions right now to do, you'll probably all make all kinds of mistakes. And that's okay, because the first time you're doing something you've never done before, the chance of you expecting to be perfect, is 0. Just like when you drove a car for the first time. So it's important that you practice and stay consistent. That's why our course is a minimum 6 weeks long. We don't have weekend courses. right? We have weekend course over 6 weeks, but not one weekend course, because it takes time to actually develop the skill. And we want to have you with us for at least the time you start developing that confidence. And we also recognize that you will be making mistakes. So when you're in a class, you'll be able to ask the instructor questions. We'll walk you through certain strategies, and then we'll support you. We'll have office hours every week. Every student who comes to our class gets 3 hours of one-on-one tutoring, because we want to give you that coaching and that feedback so that you can actually learn how to get better and better and learn from your own mistakes. And that ultimately brings us to step number 3. And step 3 is actually develop good habits. Because you may have heard the phrase, practice makes perfect. That is not true, unfortunately. Practice doesn't necessarily make perfect, because if somebody practices bad habits, they're not going to become perfect. Practice makes a habit. That means once you learn these good strategies, you need to practice a lot. And the more you practice, the more you're going to recognize what you need to improve. So when you come to a class, we're going to teach you not just strategies, and certainly not simply the theory, but also how do you learn. You're going to develop new learning skills. And we as GMAT instructors have been trained by people who actually are professional trainers, people who are learning psychologists, of how we can actually get the maximum efficiency of learning from you. So here are the 3 steps. Theory first, then learn how to do it, and then practice enough until you get better. If you would like for us to walk you through the entire process and be with us and be in a group of people and have a lot of fun as you're studying, you can join our program. It's 6 or 12 weeks long, either 2 classes a week or 1 class a week. It's a fairly small class, usually about 10 to 15 people. You can either join us in person in Toronto or in a live interactive class anywhere in the world. By the way, you will be on webcams with the microphones at that time, and we'll support you until you are done. So we'll give you a chance to come back to a class for free for 1 year. There's coaching outside of a class, and we have a promotion because of all the MBA events until this Friday. You can save $200 on any live GMAT course. It is fairly affordable if you compare it with other courses, and it's going to save you a ton of time. We started a new weekend course just this weekend, 3 days ago. You can still join it potentially, or there's also an evening course that's starting at the end of September. If you are not able to join a live class, then there are flexible self-study options as well. You can go on admitmaster.com/offer, and you can see the options. The options to take our classes in the asynchronous format and work with an instructor. And there's even what we call the GMAT Express self-prep, which is a very affordable option. If you heard of classes such as target test prep, this is actually a lot more in depth and it's less expensive. We don't spend as much money on marketing, so we can afford to give you a higher quality course at a smaller price point. We do keep track of the success of our students. About a third of our students get scored of 700 or more, and the average is 670. When you come to our class right now, we will help you prepare for either the current version of the test or the GMAT Focus, whichever exam you're preparing for. So ladies and gentlemen, where do we go from here? If you're the kind of person who says, I want a good score, and ideally I want a 700 plus, and I want to do that before the exam changes, then come and join us in our live classes. If you're still exploring, you're saying, I'm going to do my MBA sometime in 2025, 2026, then the exam is valid for 5 years, but you can take things slower. Come to our next refresher class. We'll spend 2 hours talking about math on September 27th. Make sure you take a practice test, trygmat.com. Takes about 3.5 hours. It's going to help you understand where you're starting from, what your strengths and weaknesses are. You can find all of that at admitmaster.com/offer. We'll follow up with you. We'll send you all of these resources by email in case you weren't taking notes. We'll also share the recording of this class with you. From me, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say, I hope that you're as excited about the GMAT as you are about getting into a business school, because the GMAT is going to definitely help you get ready for the business school. Somebody has a question, GMAT versus GRE. Okay, so that's a really good question. Now, most of the business schools will be accepting either the GMAT or the GRE. However, statistically, based on what we know and the relationship we have with different business schools, as well as the GMAT and the GRE itself, is that people who do the GMAT will generally get an advantage in the application and the scholarships. Some of the business schools do not accept GRE. So by doing the GRE, you can potentially limit your options. Some people do the GRE because they think it's easier, and it's actually not true. It is not necessarily an easier exam. There are about 5 times more people doing the GRE than doing the GMAT. So it's still a competitive exam. It's still standardized test. If you're still trying to understand whether you should do the GMAT or the GRE, I would suggest take practice tests on both and see if you do significantly better on the GRE, then you can absolutely do that. But if you don't do dramatically better on GRE, my suggestion is stick with the GMAT. It will A, help you get better prepared for the business school. B, it'll generally give you an advantage compared to other people who do the GRE when you're applying to business schools. It's going to get you a higher chance of getting in, a higher chance of getting a scholarship. And C, once you graduate, it will actually give you an advantage in the recruitment because certain consulting firms, investment banks, like I mentioned, do ask for the GMAT score. Nobody asks for the GRE score. So if they ask you for the GMAT score, you need to produce it. And if you don't have the GMAT score, then generally you might not be considered for some of these very competitive positions. So that's my take on it. And again, if you want to know a little bit more, then just please connect with me personally, and we can talk about this. Somebody was saying which test is easier. Well, just like I mentioned, there's no such thing as an easier test, right? This is the test that measure different things, right? What's your take on this, Farhia?
Yeah, I think it's really important, as you mentioned, that students are able to do both the sample, the practice tests, which is really a good indicator as to which is easier for them and which they're able to do. And I think it's great that you encourage them to do this, and I would do the same thing. Please do both of them. If you haven't had a chance to do the GMAT or the GRE, do the sample tests and see which is easier for you. Of course, we are at the end of our session today, so I'd like to say a personal thank you to Sergey. That was very informative. Lots of interesting information for me as well as the applicants who have attended. So we will be sending out a follow-up email, and Sergey will be able to get in touch with you, or you'll be able to get in touch with him if you have any questions. So on behalf of our team here at the Rotman Morning, Evening, MB Studies, I'd like to thank Sergey for this very informative session, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming. We will be following up with an email after this, and I'd like to wish you all a lovely day. Thank you for coming, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming. Take care, and please get in touch.